And the great fluctuations in temperature are during glaciations, not during the benign interglacial that we are in. So you can see where we are, and you can see all the sorts of projections that people are making. Notice they're all going up. And that, I think, those computer projections are totally incommensurate with the past. You cannot understand the present without understanding the past. And that is my main beef with the people frightening us witless about climate. And we can see that for millions of years we have been cooling down. Now this is from the North Atlantic, this is from sediments on the seafloor where we can compute temperatures, and remember that Greenland got its ice about 2.67 million years ago. And what has happened? We've had cooling. No surprise. We're in an ice age. And what has happened during the ice age? Temperature is up and down. And what happens when you, at today's time? Well, nothing very special. Temperature still goes up and down. This is again a repeat, showing the interglacials, where it's warm. But when did temperature fluctuate? It was during the glaciations. This is when you have rapid warming and rapid cooling. This is when you have uncertainty of seasons. This is the time in the past when we've seen in historical times when people have been starved to death because there was no food. Here again, this is a broad scale picture showing red temperature, blue carbon dioxide, but the interesting thing is dust. We hear people saying, well, when we have global warming, runaway global warming, we'll have deserts form everywhere. I'm sorry, the ice core record shows that when it's cold, you get dust. The geological record shows that when it's cold and you've got glaciation in one part of the world, you've got deserts and dust storms in another part of the world. So the very information that is out there, freely available, is just not used if you want to scare someone to death. And this is well known, bottom right, there's little bubbles of carbon dioxide in ice. We've got the ice cores there. But what we see is that from these ice core records, we see that temperature rises before carbon dioxide rises. Temperature is driving carbon dioxide. It is not the inverse. Again, this is out in the literature, and the silence is deafening coming from the warmists. They cannot argue with their own diagrams like this. And there's about an 800-year period. Now, if you want to say, oh God, we're all going to warm up and die, just look at the past. During cold times, and we're talking in the last glaciation, which finished not so long ago in this part of the world, 10,000 years or so ago, we had rapid temperature fluctuations. On the right of the diagram, these are the sort of temperature fluctuations we see now. And we know that because it was warm in Roman times, a couple of degrees warmer. And the Romans and the Greeks were scantily clad. It wasn't because they were going to an orgy, or they might have been, but it was warm. It was much warmer than now. And they kept good records of grapes and salt harvests and where they planted their olives. Then we dropped into the Dark Ages, and it was cold, and people died, and the weakened population got hit by the plague. Then we went into the medieval warming. It was a couple of degrees warmer than now. Barley and wheat were grown on Greenland. There were cattle and sheep there. The depth of the graves tells us it was warm. Eric the Red was saying, come to this wonderful green, benign climate. And it was. Now, if you are arguing that humans have given us this 20th century warming, then you have to explain the medieval warming. How was that done? Totally omitted from the record with the hockey stick and other various fraudulent methods. The rate of global warming. Well, if we look at this very cold period, some 11,000 years ago, when we humans invented agriculture and lived in villages, etc., we had a period of warming coming out of the Younger Dryas. It was only 15 degrees Celsius in 20 years. That's global warming. And what happened? Humans thrived. So the whole concept is incommensurate with history. And we look at history and we see the current period we're in, warm, thriving empires, the same in medieval times, the same in Roman times, the same with the Minoans. The Minoans were wiped out by a volcano, Thera, in 1470 BC. They were not wiped out by climate. And again, we see, if we look at history, what we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history. Because if you totally ignore history with your alarmist views, then you come up with a very different conclusion. The Little Ice Age here started about 1300 AD. It was bitterly cold. We had mass depopulation. It was even colder when we had an inactive sun. So what does the planet tell us? Well, it tells us that we're getting change, and it's normal. And it happens in your lifetime, it happened in the past, it will continue to happen. And it happened well before humans put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And the rates of change we see today are nothing different from the past. And for most of time, the planet's been warmer and wetter and more volcanic than now. Ice is a rarity. And we have this appallingly shocking thought that just because something happens in your life doesn't mean you caused it. And I know it's hard to take, but that's what planet Earth tells us. And it tells us that a trace gas is really quite irrelevant. And that trace gas is irrelevant to climate, but it's vital for life. And it is part of the natural cycle. I've tried to indicate that that natural cycle is not the cycle we get told. We get a very simple story. The natural cycle ties in to massive volcanic events and sequestering the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and it's only there for a short period of time. And it goes into the oceans, which store the bulk of the heat. It's not the atmosphere. And if we use the IPCC's own figures, they will say that we humans put out less than 4% of the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and the rest of the emissions are natural. The challenge is for those people who want to frighten us witless to prove that that 4 or 3% carbon dioxide drives climate and the other 97% doesn't. They haven't done it. They haven't looked at the past drivers of past climates, and I would equate the thinking processes of our climate alarmists to those of creationists. And the first time I came to Calgary, I gave a talk on creationism, so I might as well finish on that. Creationism has a holy book. Well, most people haven't read it. Well, the warmists have the IPCC volumes, and they haven't read them. The creationists have their prophets like Dwayne Gish, and the warmists have Al Gore. And then they have this layer beneath them of disciples who are out there. And you look at the way the creationist business structures work and the way the Climate Institute business structures work. They are opaque, they frighten people witless, and you can buy indulgences. And I argue very strongly that what we are dealing with today with this climate alarmism is a new fundamentalist religion restricted to Western countries that are or used to be Christian, and there are elements of that in this catastrophic view. Now, if you don't repent and pay huge amounts of extra tax, then you're going to fry and die. However, I'm a positive person, and there are three things that are going to guarantee that we climate rationalists are going to win the day. The first is, it is now starting to hurt people in their pockets. They are paying for alternative energy, you know, the sunbeams and sea breezes type energy. Energy where you spend a huge amount of energy to build a wind farm, and during the effective working life of that wind farm, it puts out less energy than was used to make it. And people are now seeing that come through as their energy costs, their food costs, their travel costs. That's the first thing. The second thing is, as we heard in the introduction, the weather. That's going to change it. And the Northern Hemisphere winters over the last few years have reminded people how poor forecasting is. It will take time. From looking at the average age of the audience here, we won't see it in our lifetime because too many people have made their careers out of frightening us witless about something that doesn't exist. Thank you.